Stop the cameras. Those 3 words cut through the Dr. Phil studio like a knife through silence. The audience, usually buzzing with anticipation, froze. Cameras continued rolling, but every operator's hand hesitated on their equipment. Dr. Phil McGraw, standing center stage with a manila envelope in his hand, had just done something he rarely does. He broke protocol. On the couch in front of him sat the Mitchell family, Sarah, 43, her brother David, 45, and their elderly parents, Robert and Eleanor Mitchell, both in their late 70s. What had begun as a family mediation session about their late grandmother's estate had just taken a turn that no one in that room saw coming. "I need to speak with production," Dr. Phil said, his voice steady but urgent. He turned away from the family and walked toward the edge of the stage where producers stood with clipboards and headsets. The studio lights seemed brighter in the sudden quiet. Eleanor was crying softly into a tissue. David had his head in his hands. Sarah stared at the envelope on the coffee table as if it were a live grenade. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. But truth has a way of destroying carefully constructed narratives, and today, 30 years of family secrets were about to come crashing down. Let me take you back to where this all started. 3 weeks earlier, the Mitchell family had reached out to the Dr. Phil show in desperation. Their grandmother, Margaret Mitchell, had passed away 6 months prior at the age of 94. She had been the matriarch of the family, the glue that held everyone together. But her death hadn't brought the family closer, it had torn them apart. The issue was simple on the surface: inheritance. Margaret had left behind a modest estate, a paid-off house in suburban Connecticut worth approximately $480,000, some savings, and a few personal items. Nothing extravagant, but enough to matter. The problem was the will. Or rather, what wasn't in the will. Sarah, the eldest grandchild, claimed that Margaret had promised her the house years ago. She had been the one who visited every week, who took Margaret to doctor's appointments, who sat with her during chemotherapy. David, on the other hand, insisted that he deserved a larger share of the financial assets because he had helped Margaret manage her finances for the last decade. But the parents, Robert and Eleanor, were caught in the middle. They loved both their children, but they knew something the siblings didn't. Something Margaret had made them promise never to reveal. When the family arrived at the Dr. Phil studio that Tuesday morning, the tension was palpable. Sarah hadn't spoken to David in 4 months. The siblings sat on opposite ends of the curved couch, their parents wedged uncomfortably between them. Dr. Phil's team had done their homework. They had copies of the will, bank statements, and a timeline of Margaret's final years. The episode was supposed to be straightforward. Dr. Phil would mediate, help the family communicate, and guide them toward a fair resolution. Maybe bring in a financial expert. Standard protocol for estate disputes. But 5 minutes into the taping, something shifted. Dr. Phil asked a simple question that would change everything. "Robert, Eleanor," Dr. Phil said, leaning forward in his chair, "I've read the will. I've seen the documents. But I want to ask you directly, did Margaret ever express to either of you who she wanted to inherit the house?" Robert's face went pale. Eleanor's hand found her husband's and squeezed. Hard. She wanted. Robert started, then stopped. He looked at his wife, then at his children. Sarah and David were both staring at him now, waiting. Dr. Phil noticed the hesitation immediately. After decades of reading body language, he knew when someone was holding back. "Robert, what is it?" "There's something we never told them," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible through the studio microphones. The audience leaned forward collectively. Dr. Phil set down his notes. "What is it?" he asked gently. Eleanor looked at her husband, seeking permission. Robert nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "The house," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "It's not going to either of them. Margaret changed her will 3 months before she died." Sarah gasped. David shot to his feet. "What are you talking about? Why wouldn't she?" "Sit down, David," Dr. Phil said firmly. It wasn't a request. David sat. Dr. Phil turned back to the parents. Changed it to whom? That's when Eleanor said the words that would stop the show cold. To a grandson none of you have met. The studio erupted. Audience members gasped audibly. Sarah started crying. David's face flushed red with confusion and anger. Dr. Phil held up his hand for silence, but his own expression had shifted from professional mediator to deeply concerned human being. Hold on, Dr. Phil said. Hold on. He stood up from his chair and walked over to the producers. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone could see him speaking urgently, gesturing toward the stage. After 30 seconds of intense discussion, he returned. We're going to take a pause, Dr. Phil announced to the studio. Audience, please remain seated. Family, I need you to stay right where you are. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. During the unscheduled break, Dr. Phil sat down with Robert and Eleanor in a private room backstage. No cameras. No audience. Just 3 people and a secret that had been kept for nearly half a century. Robert explained everything. In 1976, before he married Eleanor, Robert had a brief relationship with a woman named Catherine. She got pregnant. Robert was young, scared, and unprepared for fatherhood. Catherine decided to raise the child on her own and moved across the country. Robert sent money for years quietly, but never met his son. He named him Michael. When Robert eventually married Eleanor 2 years later, he told her the truth. Eleanor remarkably accepted it. They decided together never to tell their future children, Sarah and David, about their half-brother. It seemed easier that way. Cleaner. But Margaret knew. She had always known. And 3 months before she died, she made a decision. She said, Robert explained to Dr. Phil, tears streaming down his face, that Michael had been erased from this family long enough. She said if I wouldn't give him his place while she was alive, she'd do it after she died. Dr. Phil sat back in his chair, processing. And Michael? Does he know about this? We sent him a letter 2 months ago, Eleanor said. He knows he has a family. He knows about the inheritance. But he doesn't know if Sarah and David will ever accept him. Dr. Phil was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would define the rest of the episode. Bring him here, Dr. Phil said. The producers looked at each other. What? Michael. Is he in Connecticut? Dr. Phil asked. Yes, he lives about 2 hours from here, Robert said. Call him. Tell him to come to the studio. Now. Dr. Phil stood up. We're not going to resolve this with secrets and letters. This family is going to meet face to face today, and we're going to figure this out together. 2.5 hours later, production resumed. Sarah and David had been briefed during the break. They knew their parents had a secret, but not what it was. They sat on the couch, visibly anxious, whispering to each other for the first time in months. Dr. Phil walked back onto the stage. The audience was still there, confused but captivated. He didn't sit down. He stood in front of the family with that same manila envelope, the one that contained Margaret's revised will. Sarah, David, Dr. Phil began. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. But I need you to understand something first. Your parents love you. Your grandmother loved you. What happened decades ago was not about you. It was about choices made before you were born. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Your father has a son. Your parents have a son. You have a brother. His name is Michael. He's 48 years old, and he's been out there your whole lives, never knowing his family. And your grandmother, in her final act of love and justice, decided he deserved to be part of this family. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. David stood up, then sat back down, then stood up again. What? He whispered. Dad? Is this true? Robert, crying openly now, nodded. I'm so sorry. I should have told you years ago. I was ashamed. I was a coward. But Dr. Phil wasn't done. Because at that exact moment, the studio doors opened. A tall man in his late 40s walked into the studio, escorted by a production assistant, He had Robert's eyes and Sarah's smile. He looked terrified and hopeful all at once. "This," Dr. Phil said quietly, "is Michael." The studio went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Michael stood at the edge of the stage, unsure whether to move forward or run. Sarah and David stared at him as if seeing a ghost. Eleanor was sobbing. Robert stood up slowly, looking at his son, the son he hadn't seen since the day he was born. Dr. Phil gestured for Michael to come forward. "Come on up here, son." Michael walked onto the stage. Every step felt like it carried the weight of 48 years of absence. When he reached the couch, he stopped, looking at the faces of the siblings he'd never known. "Hi," he said simply. His voice cracked. David was the first to move. He stood up and extended his hand. "I'm David." Michael shook it, tears in his eyes. "I know. I've seen photos." Sarah stood next, but instead of shaking his hand, she did something no one expected. She hugged him. Tightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry you were alone." And just like that, the inheritance dispute that had brought them to Dr. Phil's stage ceased to matter. The house, the money, the will, all of it faded into insignificance compared to the moment unfolding in front of everyone. Dr. Phil, watching from a few feet away, allowed himself a rare smile. He'd seen families torn apart by greed, by lies, by betrayal. But he'd also seen moments like this, moments where love wins. Where truth, no matter how painful, sets people free. After a few minutes, Dr. Phil gently interrupted. "Michael, sit down. Your family now. This couch is yours too." Michael sat between his sisters, because that's what Sarah had instantly become to him. David moved closer, sitting on the armrest, one hand on Michael's shoulder. Robert and Eleanor flanked their children, a family reunited against all odds. Dr. Phil opened the envelope. "I'm going to read you what Margaret wrote in her will. Not the legal language, but the letter she attached to it." He pulled out a single handwritten page, worn and folded. The audience leaned in. The cameras zoomed tight on Dr. Phil's face as he read aloud. "To my family, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. But I'm not sorry for what I did. Michael is your blood, whether you knew it or not. He deserves what every grandchild of mine deserves: love, acceptance, and a place at the table. The house goes to him not because I love him more, but because he's had less. He's had a lifetime of less. Sarah and David, you've had your father your whole lives. You've had family dinners, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Michael had none of that. So I'm giving him the one thing I can, a home. Not just a building, but a home. And I'm trusting all of you to make it one. Love, Grandma Margaret." By the time Dr. Phil finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Not in the audience. Not among the crew. Not even among the hardened cameramen who'd seen everything. Sarah reached over and took Michael's hand. "The house is yours," she said firmly. "But you're not living in it alone. We're going to fill it with those dinners and birthdays and Christmas mornings. We're going to make up for lost time." David nodded in agreement. "Mom and Dad are going to need help going through Grandma's things anyway. Might as well do it as a family. All of us." Michael broke down completely. This man who had spent 48 years wondering where he came from, who he belonged to, finally had his answer. Dr. Phil sat down in his chair, satisfied but also visibly moved. "This is what I do this show for," he said, speaking both to the family and the audience. "Not to solve problems with money or contracts, but to remind people that family isn't about blood alone, it's about choice. And today, all of you chose each other." He turned to the camera, addressing the viewers at home. "If you're watching this and you're estranged from family, if there's someone you need to reach out to, if there's a truth you've been too afraid to tell, don't wait. Because life is short, and secrets have a way of haunting us longer than the truth ever does. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." After the cameras stopped rolling, the Mitchell family stayed on that stage for another hour. They talked, they cried, they laughed. Michael showed them photos of his life, his wife, his 2 kids, his career as a teacher. Sarah and David showed him photos of family gatherings he'd missed, promising to include him in every single one going forward. Dr. Phil checked in on them periodically, offering tissues and words of encouragement. Before they left, he pulled Robert aside. "You did the right thing today," Dr. Phil told him. "It took courage to let that secret out. And look what happened. You didn't lose your kids. You gained a whole family." Robert nodded, unable to speak, and embraced his son Michael one more time. As the Mitchell family walked out of the studio together, all 5 of them, arms linked, Dr. Phil stood watching from the stage. He'd seen a lot in his career. But moments like this? These were the ones that reminded him why he did this work. The manila envelope sat empty on the coffee table. The inheritance had been decided. But what they'd gained was worth infinitely more than any house could ever be.